Hey everyone, welcome back to the Lindsey Life. I am working on swatching for my Crochet Rhinebeck sweater for good. If you subscribe to my newsletter, you're going to hear all about this process, the tie-in with the Hudson Valley Textile Project, and how your Rhinebeck sweater can make a difference. But today I actually wanted to take a little side trip and tell you about my immediate association with Rhinebeck is actually my Sabbath observance as someone who's Jewish, and how that connects to my family, my past, not just like my great grandparents, but I mean all the way back to biblical times. So I'm gonna kind of explain what the Jewish Sabbath is and how Shabbat works, what technically counts as work, how that relates to knitting and crochet, and how that all ties into Rhinebeck. So let's get started. So if you've been to my website, you know that I say I'm a 24/6 crafter because I do not crochet or knit on Shabbat. Shabbat is the Jewish Sabbath. It starts from Friday night at a little before sundown and it goes until Saturday night at nightfall. So you're talking about 25 hours where I do no knitting, no crochet, no weaving, no crafting at all. So why don't I do that if this is supposed to be a day of rest? Well, it's kind of an interesting fact about how Jewish law categorizes what is work, and especially in the context of Shabbat and resting from work. So when the Jews were first told to keep Shabbat, this is like way back in biblical times. So we're talking about the book of Exodus, which in Hebrew is Shemot. And what work were they doing then? So Jews back then weren't getting on Zoom calls in the desert. Aaron wasn't FaceTiming with Moses to figure out if they should have taken a left or a right. If they had had Waze and Google Maps, the trip would have been faster. So what work were they doing? The work they were doing was building the Mishkan, or the tabernacle in the wilderness. This was kind of their portable original synagogue prayer place that went with them as they traveled. So for Shabbat observance, there are what are called 39 parent categories of work. And these are all based off of the work that was done to construct the Mishkan in the desert. So part of this was there were tapestries that they made. And so what went into making these tapestries? Shearing wool off of sheep, dyeing the wool, spinning that wool into yarn, setting the warp on a loom, tying knots, untying knots. So these are all the kind of OG categories of work that we're not supposed to do on Shabbat. So it's really interesting that when I don't crochet and I don't knit and I don't weave on Shabbat, I'm actually experiencing it and observing it the way my ancestors did all the way back in biblical times. Now, you've probably heard that Orthodox Jews, like myself, don't use electronics like computers and cell phones on Shabbat, and you're probably like, they did not have computers or cell phones in the desert, so what's up with that, Lindsey? Well, as I said, we've got these parent categories, and over thousands of years, as new inventions come up, there's kind of a general determination made as to how does this new invention fit within the Jewish law framework. Is it more like a forbidden work item, or is it more like a permitted item on Shabbat? And so that's kind of the structure where for Jewish Shabbat observance rules that has developed. But whereas things like, is a cell phone okay to use on Shabbat or a computer okay to Shabbat, been determined over the past 50 years, things about yarn and dyeing were some of the original categories of work from the beginning that Jews started observing Shabbat. So when I don't do my knitting or crocheting on Shabbat, it's really kind of connecting me to my past. Like, I know I've seen a lot of stuff talking about Jewish crochet, Jewish knitting, and how that connects us to previous generations. And usually those articles are talking about grandparents or great-grandparents or great-grandparents, and that's all very real and very valid. I have like a great story about my grandma trying to teach me to crochet. But it's fascinating and touching to know that these activities don't just connect us to our immediate predecessor generations, but in fact, they connect us all the way back to biblical times. So what in the world does this have to do with Rhinebeck? Well, the New York Sheep and Wool Festival that's held in Rhinebeck, New York, and that we all just call Rhinebeck, is on Saturday and Sunday. So obviously I don't go Saturday because I can't drive. And even if I was there, I wouldn't be touching or handling the yarn because on Shabbat, I don't even handle yarn and crochet hooks and knitting needles. Those just stay off to the side. But when I moved to Connecticut and I discovered the wonder that is Rhinebeck, I started going. And from the time my kids were little, I started taking them with me. So my kids, from a very young age, they saw a sheep get sheared. They saw yarn that was dyed. They saw looms set up for weaving. And they had all these firsthand encounters. Like, it was totally normal in my house for me to come back and be like, yeah, here's the yarn that I just dyed at Miss Lisa's house, because I went to Miss Lisa's house and we had a yarn dyeing party. So my kids had this exposure. And when they hit 6th grade at their school, my kids went to a Jewish school, the religious studies classes started hitting those parent categories of Shabbat prohibited work that related to all of this, the sheep shearing, the yarn dyeing, all of that. And you had all these kids who had no frame of reference for any of this, but my kids did. Because I knit and crochet, because I went to Rhinebeck and I took them to Rhinebeck, when they started learning about this, it wasn't some like esoteric, confusing thing that they couldn't even picture. It was like, oh yeah, I've seen a sheep get sheared. Oh yeah, I know what it's like to dye yarn. And it made it all more real and current. And they had this connection and this exposure that helped them connect to our history as the Jewish people, way back to biblical times. And I really think that was great. In fact, there's a woman locally who for many years would go to the 6th grade class and she'd do a whole presentation on what it would take to get from sheep to fabric, about how they would shear the sheep, and she'd bring in carders and show how they would card the wool and explain how the dyeing process would work. And for a lot of those kids, that was their first exposure. But my kids have been growing up with this exposure and this connection. And it's something I'm really happy about. It's a way that I connect back in time and my kids can connect back in time. Now, listen, I don't crochet or knit on Shabbat. but I definitely crochet and knit things for Shabbat. So I have made crochet challah covers and knit challah covers, and I've got yarmulkes and kippos, although those can be worn all week long, that I have crocheted. So I don't do it on Shabbat, but there are things I make during the rest of the week in honor of Shabbat as a way of bringing my creative self into this celebration and marking my connection with my roots and my history. If you liked this video, you might check out my other videos, either about crochet yarmulkes or the series of videos I have on different methods for braiding challah.